Right, so I'm just going to be, through the beginning, taking you through briefly what the UCAT is and the kind of general outline of what you need to know. So the UCAT stands for the University Clinical Aptitude Test. It's a bit different from exams that you may have taken before in the past, as it's sat on a computer. It's alike to a driving test, driving theory test, if you've sat that before. So it's a 2-hour exam. It consists of 5 sections. Each section is timed, and it is entirely multiple choice. So guessing can help you here. What is lesser known is the other version of the UCAT that there is, and that's called the UCAT-SEN. So the UCAT-SEN is a special educational needs version of the UCAT, which has at minimum 25% more time. And if you have one of the following conditions, or you think you may be eligible for it, you can register for the UCAT-SEN. There are actually smaller variations on the UCAT-SEN, which I will cover later. The evidence that you'll need for this special version of the UCAT includes a letter stating that you are entitled to this extra time, any rest breaks you're entitled to in your college or school, any other accommodations that you may need, in either your normal exams or classroom, any sort of special need that you may have. You are eligible to get your teacher, head teacher, tutor, someone who is representing you or your institution to write a letter and send that off to UCAT to apply for it. And following that, the other versions of the UCAT, if I may. So there's the standard 25% extra time version of the UCAT-SEN, and there's also a 50% version. Each of these different versions of the UCAT-SEN have different eligibility criteria, which you can find on the UCAT website when registering. Moving on to registration dates, which is slightly different this year because of the pandemic. So as of this moment, there are no specific dates that UCAT have mentioned. Generally speaking, it is within July to October. Move on, please. So here's the exact structure and timings of the UCAT. So there are 5 sections. The first section is verbal reasoning. It contains 44 questions, 21 minutes. Decision making has 29 questions, 31 minutes. Quantitative reasoning, which some may find to be the hardest, contains 36 questions in 24 minutes. Abstract reasoning has 55 questions in 13 minutes. And finally, situational judgment, which has 69 questions in 26 minutes. Each section is prefaced by a 1-minute break, which has instructions for that following section. And the total time is around 2 hours. So when you go to the exam room, exam hall, or exam center, I should say, you'll be asked for proof of identity, proof of who you are. So you need some sort of passport, driver's license, any form of official ID. You'll be asked to hand that in, and you'll be asked to put all of your belongings into a locker because you're not allowed anything.
Nafi, I'm just going to stop you there.
Yep.
I just want to ask in the chat, can everyone see this screen and the slides okay?
Yeah, I can see.
Just had a couple of comments from some people who were saying that they can't.
Looks like a majority saying yes. Okay.
So for those people who may not be able to, just ensure that you've got full screen maximized and minimize our faces so that you can see the screen. Sometimes if you double tap on our face, it loads the actual slides that we're seeing and everyone else seems to be seeing. So if you are having any issues, just send me a private message, but it's usually double tapping the screen, which should change the slides. But it seems that everyone is viewing the screen okay. Sorry, Nafi, please continue.
That's all right. So carrying on, when you're in this test center, which may be like the picture on screen, you'll be sat in front of a computer, completely shielded from everyone, with headphones on. The only equipment you will have with you is a whiteboard or laminate booklet, earplugs, if your test center provides them, and an on-screen calculator. You're not allowed to bring your own calculator, and no physical one will be provided for you. Moving on to scoring. Yes. So the first 4 sections are scored between 300 and 900. The SJT is a bit different. Situational judgment is banded. So depending on what you get, how many questions you get correct, you will be placed in a band 1 to 4, with 1 being the best and 4 being the worst. Now, when it comes to scoring in the first 4 sections, there is always 1 right answer and the rest of them are wrong. That's always the case. But for situational judgment is again slightly different. So in situational judgment, there can be partially correct answers, which are equivalent to half of one question, which correct to half of one question. So that can account for your score. On screen are some general thresholds for how many correct answers yields a specific score. This can change from year to year depending on the ability of that cohort and the number of applicants, but this is just a rough threshold of what you may see. I believe I'm going back to Cal.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted there. So I'm going to introduce Raza Ahmed. Raza Ahmed is currently a 2020 dentistry applicant, 2020 dentistry offer holder at the University of Leeds. He's also the co-founder of I Want to Be a Dentist. Nafi is unique because he sat both the UCAT and the BMAT. So Nafi's going to explain a little bit about when things don't go quite right with the UCAT and things that you can do.
Right, so if you, for any reason, get a less than favorable UCAT score, don't worry. It's not the end of the world. Things can be done. So first thing is, don't give up. Just because you get a slightly unfavorable score, don't let that put you down from going into dentistry. There are always other routes, and there's always reapplication. So first things first, know how dental schools use the UCAT. Not all dental schools are the same. The UCAT scores are used differently in every single medical school. So know what medical schools use the UCAT less if you get a more unfavorable score, and look at universities which may not use the UCAT, such as Leeds. Leeds is one of the dental schools which uses the BMAT instead of the UCAT. Don't completely write off Leeds just because you have to do another exam. Take it into consideration with everything in your dental application. As covered, the only dental school which doesn't use the UCAT is Leeds. Everyone else uses the UCAT.
So in terms of the UCAT, one thing that's really, really important is actually knowing how the dental schools will actually utilize this score. So on the screen, the key things really are to consider what weighting does the UCAT actually have in your overall application to dental school. Is there a cutoff score for the particular school? And is the SJT components of that UCAT considered in the dental school that you're applying to? So here are a list of some dental schools. We've got 2 pages of them. So this is the first page. What we can see is the different criteria that certain dental schools use. So if I draw your eyes to Glasgow and Newcastle, they actually do have a cutoff score. Glasgow, for instance, utilises a score based upon the scores attained for that particular year of entry. and therefore if your score is deemed too low, then unfortunately you may not be eligible to actually be selected for an interview. And we know that the interview is one of the most important stages. Once you attain the interview, that's part of the journey already complete. So what's really, really important is that you're aware exactly how each dental school that you're applying to actually utilizes the score, and exactly which components they actually use. In addition to that, what we can also see is some other universities. You may be familiar with some of these universities. The SJT does form a fifth of the actual UCAT test, and certain universities do place a weighting on this. So, for instance, if I explain about Manchester do not consider individuals who have attained a band 4 in the SJT. So therefore, this sort of reinforces the importance, and also the actual weight and the value that a good UCAT score can actually help with your application to dental school or even medical school. I've just flicked to the slide there to answer someone's questions. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I thought it'd be really useful to have individuals who have actually sat the UCAT. So we've got two really talented dental students. Bilal Sharaz is a 2020 dentistry offer holder. He not only got an offer for Birmingham University, he got 3 other offers. So Bilal did exceptionally well in the entrance assessments and the selection process, and we're delighted to have him on our team. And we've also got Rohan Gandhi, who's also a 4th year dental student at the University of Birmingham. And Rohan actually did really well in the UCAT with a score of over 750. So we're going to get both these people to put their mics on and just explain how their thought process, their revision strategies, and things that they did to attain a good score. And this, obviously, that these two are both dentists, but obviously the same tactics are applicable to those sitting for entry to medical school as well. So, if Bilal, you want to unmute yourself.
Yes. So hi everyone. I'm Bilal. So with regards to my UCAT journey, I spaced it out over 12 weeks, but in retrospect, I think that's something I regret. And going forward, I think I'd suggest everyone takes about 6 to 7 weeks to actually prepare for it. And with regards to how I suggest you use your time, I think you should split it up into sort of 3 phases. So phase 1, I'd say, would be familiarization. Phase 2, sort of practice. And then phase 3 should be actually practicing with mock exams and really giving yourself true exposure to the sort of exam environment. So in terms of the first phase, familiarization, I'd say the key thing to do is just get a feel for what each of the different exam formats feel like. So QR, AR, DM, and VR. I'd look into like the UCAT question bank, and there's different types of questions. So see what each of the different questions ask of you, and what they all demand. And you'll also get a bit of a feel for like how long the UCAT actually lasts for, what 2 hours feels like. So that's something really useful before actually going into the second phase, which is familiarization. Sorry, not familiarization. So practicing. With the UCAT, you need to adopt a reflective practice sort of strategy. Different techniques work for different people, so find out what works for you. I know that the team at I Want to Be a Dentist has a lot of useful resources, so using them and seeing what different strategies are available for the different sections is really useful. And yeah, so then find the technique that works best for you for each section, and then once you've got that nailed, move on to the third section. And I'd say that's basically just throwing yourself into the deep end and doing a lot of exams. And in that time, I'd say take a week out, the week before your UCAT exam, and just give yourself lots of exposure to the exams on the UCAT question. website. And then you'll also get an idea of what sort of scores you're getting, and you can make any sort of last minute adjustments. So yeah, that would be my top 3 tips.
Thank you. Rohan?
Yep. So with my journey, it was, I'd probably echo something similar to what Bill has basically said. I decided to kind of prepare for it by going through each section first, but slowly, just to kind of get a feel for the techniques. There wasn't really a theory to it, but just to understand how each section really worked in detail, to basically familiarizing myself with each part in each section and the whole overall test, what I'd be getting exactly. So I wasn't just walking into an exam not knowing what to expect. I knew fully what I was going to get and how it was going to go. So I basically spent about 5 weeks, I think, maybe just under a week on each section, just slowly familiarizing myself, speeding up, and then effectively working on practice tests, which I think there's a question here about where can we find mock exams. There was a couple that I was using, a resource that was the 1,250 question booklet on the UCAT, which had some practice tests in it, and there was also there's a practice test you can find on the website. I think there's 2 or 3 that should be there. With my experience of it, it was mainly just making sure that I was a bit more calm and collected, because as we said, this isn't an exam that we've sat before. It's all on the computer. Just trying to get a good night's sleep and making sure I arrived early and on time, so I wasn't panicking or in a rush, and just making sure I knew what was in front of me. I think, yeah, that was all really. I was just trying to, just do it over 5 weeks, almost close to a week on each section, just slowly speeding up, going through questions and making sure that I had timed it down to a good amount of time, because this exam is designed to really push you to make a decision under time pressure.
That's really, really useful advice from both, I think. In terms of, we've just had a question, so I thought it'd be great to ask you both about it. With regards to timings, how did you sort of get better at pacing yourself?
So I'll go first, if that's okay. With regards to each of the sections, you really need to get a feel of what timing feels like, because I felt that, for me personally, abstract reasoning, which was 55 questions in 13 minutes, was very different to quantitative reasoning, which was 36 questions in 24 minutes. But I know from different people will find certain sort of areas a bit more challenging. And then if there's one section which you struggle with more in particular, then I'd focus on trying to give questions in that sort of area more of a focus, so that you can improve your speed on them and you'll feel less time pressured in the exam. So ultimately, it's about making the sections you feel weaker on a strength, and by sort of tracking your scores as you go along with UCAT revision. If you know that you're scoring lower in one area, then you know that that area needs work. So that's what I mean by reflective practice. You should look at the areas you're weaker at, and then you can target which area needs a bit more revision.
Yeah, Rohan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, so what I did was something similar. It was basically just going really slowly, working out, making notes effectively on what each topic was going to suggest. So the verbal reasoning is basically like a passage, and you'll ask questions on it, and kind of working out that sometimes they would try to twist things a certain way just to kind of not confuse you, but just to make it a bit harder to work out what the answer was. So I basically just sorry, I just want my train of thought. So I just make sure that I had worked slowly through each section, just made sure I'd made notes on it and what kind of questions to expect. And once I felt comfortable with timing myself, I would then time myself doing different questions. So if we know, you say, for example, there's 36 minutes for a section, 24 questions, you're given roughly X minutes or X amount of time per question. So I tried to make sure that I was sticking to that time limit when I was revising, but just in the section, it was never fully as part of the test. And then once I'd kind of gone through all of my sections, I then kind of collated it all together and was doing a full practice run through, making sure I was timing myself on each and every section.
Fantastic. That's really, really useful. The questions that we have, we'll try to answer them via the chat, and we're going to just move on to some other bits. We will be going into more detail about each section very shortly. Nafi, this is back to you.
Sorry, just having a just my mute button was hidden from me. So there are various tools that you can use to revise for the UCAT. These are the ones that we as a team recommend and have used previously to attain our scores. One of the things I highly recommend is the official test that I've put a link to in the chat for the UCAT online tests. So you can get versions of the actual UCAT, UCAT Sen, and untimed versions. These will give you a taste of the timings. That is one of the most important things when it comes to the UCAT, getting a grip to the pressed timing you'll have for each question and how much you have to think and how you have to change the way you think. So I highly recommend that. The 1250 UCAT, UKCAT book, I don't believe that's changed to UCAT recently, that Rohan mentioned. That is a very, very useful resource. I have one right here. That has a complete bank of questions which will help you get a grip of the variety of questions. Kaplan book is also very useful, and our own book that there is a QR code for, which will have lots of hints and guides for your application into dental school. Moving forward, I believe I am passing on to Raza at this point.
Hi guys, hope everybody's doing well. So we're just going to talk about some of the courses that we have available. So like me and Cal were discussing, we're previous medicine and dental student applicants, and we know exactly what you'd possibly need to pass through these rigorous exams. So we've created the UCAT online mastery course, which is 700 plus. It contains a 700 plus question bank with worked examples and full mock tests. We'll be launching that very soon as well. As you can see, the dates are on the screen. As well as that, we're on, if you need a little bit more help or personal one-to-one tuition with our tutors, if you're looking for that as well, then we also have the one-to-one tuition service. Sorry, I've just lost the screen. There we are. So that's launching soon as well. But our first e-lesson is actually tomorrow, and it's based on the UCAT. So we've got an online classroom tuition. It's small group and classroom lessons, which will be actually launching tomorrow. Back to you, Carl.
Thank you. Thanks. Sorry, guys, I keep having to go in and out of the screen. It's because my mouse doesn't work when it's on full screen. So yeah, as Raza mentioned, we have got these UCAT e-lessons. So just touching upon what Nafi and Bilal and Rohan touched upon it, we're trying to develop things which are really, really useful for you and valuable. Because we've been through the process before, we sort of know the types of things that are really valuable when it comes to revision. So the first part of our service are these e-lessons, which actually are live, and our first one is tomorrow, as Raza touched upon. The benefits are really a small group tutorial, so there are a maximum of 10 students in each classroom session, meaning that your learning environment is really intimate and ensures that every student gets pretty much one-to-one attention. We cover every single aspect of the UCAT. So each lesson is dedicated to a section of the UCAT. So naturally we'll have 5 lessons per month, and we plan to run this every month to ensure that students who wish to prepare for the test in advance have that opportunity. In addition to that, there's opportunities to ask live questions and undertake sort of taught questions. There's also going to be tutorials. So I know some of the questions that we had were, is there like a syllabus, or how do I go about revising? We will be going through each section, what types of questions that you get, and also working through mini tests as well. You'll also receive a video tutorial recording, so that if you want to play it back at your own pace, you can do. And the way that we're structuring this is we're planning to run the sessions on an evening once per week throughout each month, with the first one being on Monday. We also have a 50% bursary available. So basically, as part of our philosophy, we want to make sure that our services are basically eligible for everyone, and we don't want to put any barriers in place. So therefore, we've decided to give 50% towards anyone who has eligible criteria for the bursary. The way to find out about that is through the QR code. So if you've got your phone, you can just scan that. Alternatively, we have got that link available on our Instagram with all the different sort of criteria and the evidence that you need to supply to validate that. But that means that's 50% off for anyone who's eligible. In terms of the sessions, we run block sessions, which are £125, or single sessions with the price there. And as I mentioned before, they've got various benefits with regards to the small group teaching, which really means that you get that attention for questions and for difficulties that you may have. In addition to that, as Bilal and Rohan touched upon, we want to stagger these throughout every month to ensure that those individuals have sufficient amount of time to prepare. And obviously they're taught by our expert tutors as well, who have helped individuals from various backgrounds attain really, really good results. So you're in safe hands with who is tutoring you. This is just an update I took today. So we've got a couple of spaces remaining. So for those people who are interested, I'd urge you to have a look and see what there is to offer and see whether this is something that suits you. For tomorrow, there's just 5 spaces left. So if you are interested, the link is on our Instagram page, but also the QR code that we have. If you scan that, that'll load up. I'm going to introduce now Akrissa Kakar. She is currently a UCAT and BMAT tutor. She has had several years of experience with tutoring both dental, medical, and even Oxbridge applicants. Akrissa is our co-director of the UCAT and BMAT course, and she is also a medical student as well. So I'm going to introduce Akrissa, who's going to be talking through some bits on the reapplication and also covering some worked examples. So lots of notes to be taken there.
Hi guys. So with resits and reapplication, medicine and dentistry are both really, really competitive courses, and not everyone will get in first time. You can see there that there are like 15 applicants for one place is really, really competitive. So don't let this dishearten you. You'll be able to resit and retake both the UCAT and resit sort of reapply again, but you can only take the UCAT once in an admission cycle. So if you feel like you didn't do as well as you were expecting to, you won't be able to resit that year, but the following year, if you choose to take a gap year and reapply, you will have to then take the exam again. So it's really, really good to start early, as Rohan and Bilal have already mentioned. It's really good to sort of start practicing early as well, because sections like the abstract reasoning, you won't have already had a lot of exposure to. So a lot of the skills that will be advantageous to you during the exam, you will pick up along your practice. So things like problem solving and reading quickly, this will come to you as you practice. So the more practice you get in, the better it is for you. And it also means that you'll be able to sort of learn from your mistakes and have time to correct them. So you can reflect on what mistakes you make and where you go wrong. And it gives you time to correct those mistakes and work out what works best for you. And you can then develop techniques that you can use to help you in the exam. And also, because it is a really long exam, it can be hard to keep focused for that long. So it's important that you start early, and it's almost like training your brain to keep focused for the whole exam, because you don't want to feel burnt out towards the end and feel like you're losing focus. So this year, schools and colleges can't accurately give predicted grades due to sort of the lack of end of year exams, which means the universities are likely to increase the weighting of their UCAT when giving out offers or selecting applicants for interview. So it's really important that you try and score as highly as possible, because it's the sort of the only exam that can be formally controlled this year. So it's very likely that universities will sort of increase their weighting on the UCAT. And because we don't actually know exactly when the UCAT will take place, we don't know how much notice you guys will have this year to sort of prepare for it. So if you start early and prepare early, you should be ready for all case scenarios.
We've just got one question there, and it was asking, out of the BMAT and the UCAT, which was easier? That's quite a difficult question to answer, sorry. But if you could give your sort of view on that, that would be useful for this individual.
Personally, I think the UCAT was actually easier, only because the content that was tested in the UCAT wasn't sort of high level. It was really easy to get used to the UCAT questions once you've had enough practice, whereas with the BMAT, they were testing a lot more higher level knowledge. But maybe Nafi has a different opinion.
I do, in fact, have a different opinion. So in my case, I found the BMAT a lot easier, mainly because, as we'll be mentioning in the BMAT webinar next week, and the BMAT uses a lot more scientific knowledge and knowledge from your GCSEs and A-levels. So if you have a good scientific foundation, you may find the BMAT easier. And crucially, the time pressure on the questions in the BMAT is considerably less than the UCAT.
Thank you, Nafi. That's really useful. So now we're going to get into the parts on the different sections and worked examples. So, Chrissa?
So the first section that we're going to talk about is the verbal reasoning section. And this section will give you a it will give you a passage. The passage will have a lot of information in it, and you'll have 4 questions per passage. So you'll have a total of 11 passages, and you'll have 44 questions. So it's really important that you're able to scan sort of the passages and the questions quickly so you can get to the answer. And it won't always be a clear, like the answer won't always be in the passage. You might have to draw a conclusion using the information in the passage. So it's important to actually understand what you've read. The different types of questions will be, so these are the different types of questions. You'll either have true, false, can't tell, in which you'll be given a statement and you have to work out if that's true, false, or you can't tell from the passage. There'll be incomplete statements where they'll literally give you an incomplete statement and ask you to finish it off. And then the according to or deduced from the passage questions will ask you to see whether a conclusion can be drawn from the passage. And then the exceptions questions will give you 3 incorrect answers and 1 correct answer. So you need to work out which one is an exception. And I've just seen the can't tell question. You will get all of the questions will have 1 answer. So if you say can't tell, it will mean that the information that they're asking for actually isn't in the passage. So it will either be true and you can find that information, or the passage will say, no, this information isn't in the question, or you actually won't be able to tell, so you won't have enough information. So some tips for this section, it's really, really important to sort of read fast. I've already mentioned that. And it's important to read the question first. You won't have enough time to sort of read the whole 200-300 words because it is a really, really time pressured section. You only have 21 minutes to complete 44 questions. And also if you've got one question that you really can't find the answer to, or you're really struggling to sort of find the key topics, just move on, pick your instinct. Another thing is when you're working out the answer to these questions, pick the key topics in the question and then go back to the passage and see if you can find those key topics, and make sure you read sort of the sentence before and the sentence after that to see if you can find the answer. So here is an example of one of the verbal reasoning questions. I don't think you guys can see that because I can't see it, but so essentially it asks you to use the information from the passage to see that whether you can, so it says using the information from the passage, it can be inferred that the strict settlement was. The best way to go about these is the key topic in this question is the strict settlement. So what you should do is go to the passage and look through where you can find the word strict settlement. So if you have a look at sort of the second paragraph, you can see that this scheme, the strict or restricted settlement. And as I mentioned, it's good to go a sentence before and a sentence after where you found the key topics. So if we go after, it tells us that it was effected and adopted by lawyers and landowners. But then if we go before, it tells us that Orlando Bridgman invented a scheme to protect royalist estates and defeated the royalists did not want to be forced to sell their property or to pay fines imposed by Parliament. So if we have a look at the answers now, the strict settlement wasn't a discovery, so we can already say that it wasn't a discovery. A device, we also know it wasn't a device, so it's definitely not A or B. It was only of practical use to wealthy landowners, so that's probable because it tells us that it was for royalists who didn't want to pay fines on their properties. And D, unpopular with members of the legal profession. We've already read that it was adopted by lawyers, so we know that C is the correct answer there.
Right, so I'm going to be going through the decision-making questions. So in decision-making questions, you'll be given some sort of information in front of you. Again, multiple choice. And the reason that the decision-making section is important is because as a medical professional, you will get lots of information and you'll need to infer and analyze them for specific conclusions and then act on them. And in that case, they can have a profound effect on another person. So it is very important. Moving on to tips. Oh, sorry, not tips, types. So these are the rough types of decision-making questions available. So logic puzzles. So you'll be given some sort of logical argument or scenario where you'll have to find if a certain outcome is correct or not. Syllogisms are where an example would be if some x is y, not all y is z, what is x? Is z part of y or x, etc. But instead of using letters, they'll be using different random words. Data interpretation, graphs, figures, charts. You'll be asked to analyze that. Assumption recognition. So in decision-making questions, you can get a block of text which is making an argument. And the multiple choice answers will involve you trying to find the correct assumption and argument in that question. The most common, I believe, are diagram questions, specifically Venn diagram questions, being able to interpret and analyze them. And finally, we have probabilities, understanding how probabilities work and the probability of an event occurring. Here is an example of a decision-making question. As you can see, it is a question of Venn diagrams. So the diagram shows how the employees in one department of a small business travel to work each day using different forms of transport. Now, personally, when I look at decision-making questions, I tend to ignore the initial text and go straight to the question, because the question will be what you'll be looking for in the information provided. So which of the following letters represents workers who get to work using a combination of car, train, and walking? So on the diagram, I can see that there are different shapes, each representing a specific mode of transport. So the ones that I need to be aware of are car, train, and walking. And they are represented by the triangle, square, and circle respectively. So on the diagram, I would look for where the triangle, square, and circle are and find that the letter which is in the overlap of all of them is the letter L. So the answer for that would be L. I note that I did not pay attention to the cycle or bus. I did not pay attention to any of the other shapes, and that is important when answering these questions. Any irrelevant information, even the initial text, that's irrelevant to answering the question, and it will save you time and it will be a benefit to you in the exam. Moving on to tips, eliminate irrelevant data, because it will save you when trying to look at what you specifically need. Practice logical reasoning there are loads of logical reasoning puzzles that you can do, and in practice questions, it helps you to practice if A means B, not A means not B, but B does not mean A. Things like that. Revise probabilities. Probabilities can come up in decision-making questions, and decision-making questions can be very mathematical. So it's important to have a basic understanding of mathematics, not anything too high level, just understand that probabilities can add up to 1 and how probabilities can, how you can calculate probabilities for certain events. And what I think is the most important tip is to sketch diagrams. So lots of questions will be written in text, but it will be describing a diagram. So if you can infer from a question the diagram that it's suggesting, draw the diagram, and then move on and solve the question. Moving on to quantitative reasoning, I believe one of the most sought out sections. You'll be given, it's very similar to decision making, but it's very mathematical in nature. So you'll be given numerical data, charts, tables, graphs. You'll be given multiple questions per data set. So you can have a table of different numbers, and multiple choice questions can be asked of that data set, which is why we recommend some sort of GCSE level maths or equivalent, understanding how to manipulate numbers and how to round. So the reason it's important is any medical professional needs to understand what numbers mean and how to interpret them. It's relevant in both practice and research. So moving on to the different types, there could be interpreting statistics, so being given a graph or chart. Spatial reasoning, you could be given a net or a net of a shape and asked to figure out which can create a certain shape and which would look like that. That comes under quantitative reasoning. And interpreting data sets, you'll be given multiple data sets and asked questions on them. So moving on to an example. So this is, there's actually a slight cutoff of the question in the presentation, but I will get to that in a sec. So a factory makes closed cartons. It has 3 machines to make the cartons. The machines start at 8 a.m. and work continuously until 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. The machine can make 80 cartons per hour. The factory also makes closed boxes. The measurements of the carton are 2 meters by 2 meters by 3 meters, and the measurements of a box are 30 centimeters by 40 by 50. Each edge of a carton is strengthened using tape. How much tape in centimeters is required to strengthen all 80 cartons? That's the part that was cut off. So it's calculating the amount of tape required to strengthen all the edges of 80 cartons. So how I would go about doing it is by sketching a cube or a cuboid. So start by sketching a cube or a cuboid and labeling each of the edges 2, 2, and 3. And then from that, I can find that each edge is repeated 4 times on a cube. I don't believe I can draw on here to show, but if you draw a cube, you can find that each of those edges are repeated 4 times. So the way you can calculate it is by adding those numbers up, 2, 2, and 3. 2, 2, and 3 to get 7, and then timesing that by 4, which is, wow, my math has stopped. 7 timesing it by 4, which is 28. Converting it to centimeters, and then multiplying it by 80, which will get you an answer of D, 224,000 centimeters. So pay attention to units, because that's another thing that will they will try and trick you on. So obviously it's in meters, but the answers are all in centimeters. Tips. Similar to decision making, eliminate irrelevant data. Use standard form when possible. If numbers get big, you want to be able to manipulate them in your head instead of using the online calculator. The online calculator can be the bane of your existence when going through quantitative reasoning questions. Some questions, it may be easier to actually look at the answers instead of actually solving it. Whatever is less time, convert correctly, make sure your units are correct and that you know your unit prefixes. And don't round early. If you're doing a mathematical question and some steps require rounding, don't round until the end, because you may get rounding errors which give you a wrong answer. Now, moving on to the next section, which I believe is back to Carissa.
So the abstract reasoning section is something that's going to be completely new to a lot of people. In this section, you're going to be given sort of a different number of shapes, and sort of these shapes will be colored in, or they'll be differently structured. And what you need to do is analyze those shapes and either work out what the pattern is or work out what shape comes next. So the reason why this is important is because as both medics and dentists, you're going to need to sort of identify symptoms and clues, and you need to generate hypotheses and then change track and query those as you go on. So you're going to need to use those skills in abstract reasoning as well as sort of making diagnosis in the future. So if we go on to the different types of questions, you'll find you'll have pattern or set A, set B, or neither questions. And these and the pattern set belonging questions are both very similar. You'll be given two patterns, so you'll be given set A and set B, which will both follow a similar pattern. And then you'll be asked to either decide whether the answer falls in set A or set B, or you'll be asked to sort of pick whether the answer doesn't fall in either. Completing the pattern series, you'll have sort of a series of 4 different shapes, and you'll then need to work out which comes next in the series. So they'll all follow a similar pattern, and to get from 1 to 2, you'll have to do the same thing to get from 2 to 3. And then pattern relation, they will give you they'll give you 2 shapes. They'll say A is to B as C is to, and then you need to work out the D. So you need to work out the relationship between A and B and then apply that relationship to C. If we go through an example, so in these, it's really useful to sort of have a mnemonic, because sometimes you might not be able to quickly pick up the pattern. And it's really good to think of a mnemonic that includes both like shape, color, angles, numbers, symmetry, and dependence of shapes. So those are just some really common things that will be the pattern. So if we have a look at this question, we'll have a look at the type of shape first. And really quickly in this question, you can see that in set A, all of the shapes have curved edges. And once you've found the pattern for one of the sets, follow a similar reasoning for the next set. It will be a similar pattern. It won't be exactly the same, but it will follow the same principles. So we found that set A has curved lines in all the shapes. So if we look at set B, we can now see that all of the shapes in set B actually have straight lines. So to see which set the test shape belongs to, the top shape's got only straight lines, and the bottom shape has curved lines. So this one actually doesn't belong to either of the sets. The answer is C, neither. Some tips for abstract reasoning. It's really important to sort of, these things are what you should have in your sort of mnemonic that you make for yourself, because they're all really common things to come up. So if you can quickly check them off as you're looking at the shapes, it will be really, really useful. If you can sort of see automatically that one of the shapes doesn't belong, or if you can instantly see that one of the answers is completely incorrect, go ahead and eliminate that, because this section is really, really time constrained. So if you can see, if your gut tells you that one shape completely can't be right, then you are probably right because of the practice you've done. So just eliminate that answer and use the other ones. And it's really important to consider dependence in shapes as well. So that's sort of whether one shape will impact another. For example, you might have 4 dots and then a 4-sided shape. So they depend on how many dots they are. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Distractors, you won't be able to always tell which shapes are distractors. So it's helpful to sort of isolate the different shapes in the series. And if you can't find a pattern in sort of the first 10 seconds, I'd say, move on to a different shape, because if you can't find a pattern, then that is likely to be a distractor if you've been through all of these things that are on the screen. So now we'll move on to situational judgment. And in situational judgment, you'll be given sort of a written scenario of a medical or a dental situation, and you'll be asked if the actions are appropriate or inappropriate, or if factors are important or not. And this is obviously really, really important, because in the working life, in your working life and even in university, you'll be faced with loads of different scenarios that you need to make a judgment on yourself, and you need to know how to act accordingly, both professionally and ethically. So this is a really important section, and a lot of universities do sort of see it as an important thing. If we go on to, so the different types of questions you'll get here are appropriateness, importance, and most and least. So you'll be faced with a scenario, and they'll give you a response to that scenario, and you need to say whether that that response is appropriate or not. Or in importance, you'll be given a scenario and you'll be given factors to consider. So you need to say which factor is important or not. And then in most and least, you'll be given a scenario again, but this time you'll be given 3 or 4 different responses to that scenario, and you need to rate which one is most and which one is least appropriate. So the most and least appropriates are more likely to be more than 1 mark, because you have to work out both most and least appropriate actions, whereas the other 2 will only be 1 mark, so there'll be multiple choice. Here's an example. So a patient tells a final year medical student, Jake, about a conversation that he had with another final year medical student, Eloise. The patient says that Eloise boasted about submitting an essay in her first year of medical school that she had copied from a sample essay on the internet. Eloise is generally thought of as an excellent, honest, and hardworking student. The patient is known to have told lies about students and medical staff previously. How important to take into account are the following considerations for Jake when deciding how to respond to the situation? So the consideration that we have here is Eloise's current reputation within the medical school as someone who's unlikely to copy essays from the internet. So this is important because it means that it might be unlikely that Eloise did or didn't do what she's saying. So it's important in the sense that it sort of reflects on her character, but at the same time, copying another essay is plagiarism, and that's not allowed in anywhere really. So it's really important for Jake to act in a way that's fair to everyone in the situation. So even though it doesn't sort of reflect on her personality to have copied an essay from the internet, it isn't that important when he makes a decision, because if the case is true and she has, then that's not fair on anyone else sitting the course. So for this, you would say C of minor importance. And then some tips on situational judgment. You should read both the Good Medical Practice and General Dental Council's standards and guidance. So these will basically give you everything that you need to know about how to act in situational judgment. They'll give you sort of guidance, and they'll give you ways, they'll give you the ways in which the medical and dental councils will expect you as both the doctor, dentist, or a student to act in response to certain situations. And you should understand key values such as integrity, teamwork, general values. You should try and be as ethical as possible, and make sure that the way you act is always putting sort of the patient's safety and their well-being at utmost priority.
We just got a question in the chat regarding the last question. So the question was actually, I'm just going to go back to that slide so that everyone can see. So why would D not be the correct answer in this case?
So essentially, I can't even read it. Okay. So D is not important at all. The reason why that wouldn't be correct is because it depends on the action that Jake is about to take, and obviously he's going to want to think about everyone in the situation. So for example, if Eloise wasn't someone who generally does. So if in fact, if she was generally someone who's known to copy things and not work very hard, then it would mean that he can sort of go to, he would feel like it's more appropriate to just go to sort of hire people in the medical or dental school. Whereas because she is known to sort of be a generally excellent student, it gives Jake a chance to speak to Eloise herself. So rather than just assuming that the patient is absolutely correct, it means that Jake will first sort things out with Eloise herself and ask her sort of why the patient's saying this, or what he meant by that, rather than going straight and sort of reporting her to the medical school and sort of creating problems there. And that if he did do that and it turned out that Eloise was, or the patient was lying, then it would create problems with his relationship with her as a peer and stuff.
So, oh, sorry, was someone going to say something there? Bilal?
No.
Oh, sorry, I thought someone was going to say something. What would be classified is important / extremely important? Sorry, what would be classified is important / extremely rather than minor importance? What would be classified as important / extremely rather than minor? So how to differentiate between...
One classic example of that is patient confidentiality and maintaining that. So you can get multiple questions based on data around a patient, and your utmost important is to keep, it's of utmost importance to keep that information confidential and secure. There is no leeway in that. Another example is, just off the tip of my tongue, patient care and patient safety. They are always very important, and are, because they are one of the key values of the GMC and the GDC, they will almost always be classified as very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just touching upon both of the points there, in order to help individuals prepare for this type of thought process, it's important to understand the ethical principles that medical and dental students and dentists should be able to follow. So I would certainly advise you to familiarize yourself with the GMC and the GDC guidelines, which basically illustrate the key points in which we should be abiding by. And as Nafi said, one of the key things for that is maintaining and protecting patient confidentiality. That is something that is a really, really important point. So I would advise you to seek that, and that can be available on the GMC and the GDC website. That their acronyms standing for General Medical Council and General Dental Council. So that's really, really useful to look into, not only for the interviews, but also to structure your answer for the SJT part of this assessment. Thank you very much for that. So, general tactics and tips. This, we're going to introduce Rohan again to talk a little bit about strategies, tips, and advice when revising.
Yep. So when you're revising, what we've got here is like just a couple tips. So the official calculator on the UCAT website is going to be almost ancient, is what I would describe it as. It's not like your normal Casio calculators that you might have in your pencil case. You really want to make sure you're familiar with it, because it will be your best friend when you can't work out anything in your head, basically, or on paper. So one of the things that I actually did was, you can do these untimed tests online. And what I would do is go straight to the quantitative reasoning section, and I would load up that calculator while I was doing my own practice tests. So by doing that, I was basically allowing myself to get familiar with the calculator and how it worked. Timing is very important. This whole test is effectively just trying to see how well you can work under time pressure. Can you get to the right answer? So you want to make sure that you are sticking to a time limit when you're revising, and understand you can work out roughly how much time you get per question just by dividing the number of questions per minute. But obviously give yourself some time to maybe, say for the verbal reasoning section, read the passage and understand it. Yeah, make sure to take breaks and exercise. You don't want to be burning out when you're revising. The last thing you want to be doing is putting in 12-hour shifts all day, and then you just almost knock out when you go to bed, having 3 hours sleep and back at it again the next day. You're not going to make any progress. Yeah, reflect on your mistakes, I guess. So when you're doing the practice, and even if you're going through it slowly and you get the wrong answer, look back on what you're doing. So look back at what went wrong, how it went wrong, and what you don't want to repeat, to make sure you're not making that same mistake again, because the last thing you want to be doing is making that same mistake, because that's the only way to progress, is to basically improve. Yeah, I'd say, sorry, Cal, you think you're muted.
No, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I was going to say, to work through each area slowly. I think, like everyone here has basically said, practice and familiarity is almost key with this exam. It's not like GCSEs or AS levels or anything that you've sat before. It's a completely different kind of exam. And I think the more familiar you are with it, the better you will do. Just give yourself plenty of time to do the prep or do the revision, basically. And that includes time for practice questions. If you're one of those people who prefers to make notes, or however you prefer to do things, I prefer to make notes first on what I would do, or patterns like we've talked about. Then I would then go through each section slowly. So yeah, just make sure you have enough time and give yourself enough time to just basically to work through everything, and that you're not ending up doing like 5 practice tests the night before. Just make sure you're giving yourself enough time to do that.
Bilal, did you have anything to add to that?
I think Rohan covered it very well, but I'd say one thing that I'd like to emphasize to everyone is the importance of not burning out with the UCAT. It's not like GCSEs or A levels, where normally the work you put in corresponds to a better result. It's really important to be strategic with the UCAT. So just make sure you're really effectively planning everything you're doing. And like Rohan said, if you do like 12 hours in a day, get very little sleep, and then go back at it again, you're not going to make any progress. So it's important to just have a work-life balance as well when you're doing the UCAT. So yeah, just keep that in mind. It's not to be neglected.
Just had a quick question. If on one section you aren't getting constant marks, getting some wrong and some right constantly, how would you tackle this? If on one section you aren't getting constant marks, getting some wrong and some right constantly, how would you tackle this?
So I think for sections like that, I think when you first start out, especially when I started out anyway, there was a section, I think it was the abstract reasoning, because it's a very unfamiliar section. A lot of my marks I was getting back on it were quite inconsistent. But I think after a while, I just kind of looked back at all the questions I'd gotten wrong, and just effectively tried to work out why they went wrong. So was it because I was running out of time, or was it because I didn't recognize the pattern? Yeah, it was just basically things like that, just making sure I looked at what exactly was the reason. I didn't stop working on the question that I got wrong. I'd then try it again, maybe at a later stage, and make sure that if I hadn't got the right answer. But yeah, it was just things like that. How many hours would you recommend a day? I guess it is really up to you how well you work. I think I personally spent, I think, about 2-3 hours a day. I didn't want to overwork myself, and I gave myself, I started early enough, for me it was 5 weeks, about 2 to 3 hours a day, just to make sure I wasn't overworking myself. I wasn't sitting at home doing nothing all day. Just keep everything ticking over.
Just got a question as well. How do you go about making notes on the UK? Well, it's a UCAT now examination.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was called UCAT in my time. I think with the notes, I went through each section. So I think the 1250 question book really was useful because it gives you a brief overview of each section. And I basically just kind of, it was just how I work. So I realized that I would need, say, a minute or two for reading a passage for verbal reasoning. And then I would then deduct that from the overall time and divide it by how many questions I would have. And I'd basically work out how long I needed. And that was part of my notes, just to make sure that I was sticking to it. Even for things like abstract reasoning, I had a list of all the kind of patterns that they can use. And yeah, with quantitative reasoning, I just made sure that with my notes, I familiarize myself with basic maths. So you want to be able to comfortably use, say, fractions or percentages or differing units. You want to be able to convert between them. So I made sure that I was confident with all of that. And that was kind of notes that I'd made. It wasn't like school where you have to make notes for like maths or whatever. It was more making a small amount of notes. So maybe one tiny notepad for each section, like one small like piece of paper that size.
Fantastic. We've got a question here, which I think I'll direct to Raza perhaps. Is it a good idea to start now, or should we wait until registration opens?
For me personally, especially in the time that we're in currently, I'd prefer to start now because there is so much uncertainty around the exam. It could turn out that they start immediately releasing the dates, and some candidates have to sit it because of the COVID situation. They have to sit it quite early. So to just give yourself the best possible chance, I would start early. And for that, I think the e-lessons are really great because we have our first one tomorrow. And what that essentially does, it would put you in the right frame of mind. We all know that eventually we're hoping, and we're pretty certain that eventually the UCAT dates will be released, and the exams will still go ahead. And because of this whole situation and as uncertainty around A-levels, I think the UCAT holds more weight than it ever did because it's one exam that you can actually control, and that result that you get might be the breaking point for you to get a place or not. So I'd definitely say start early rather than start late, because if you find some sections hard, you have a lot of time right now to cover that and make that your strength rather than going into exam and, because you're unprepared, risking your whole application. Because remember, you only get one chance at the UCAT per year, and you don't want to wait another year and go into the retake cycle because that will just put you under a lot of pressure for your A-level exams actually as well, because you'll need the even better marks to be recognised the second time round. So I'll definitely say start early. I personally would start off, like Bilal said, not to burn yourself out, but do start early to start, picking up some techniques within the exam, and you'll find a way to hopefully revise with your own style. But yeah, definitely with the e-lessons, I would say get on that if you can, because it's a perfect opportunity and it might be the difference for you getting a place or not.
And also in terms of, just had a question here about sort of what time frame do you think is appropriate to start really?
So it depends on when the exact dates are, but usually candidates who score the highest usually spend about 6 to 8 weeks revising. Now for that, like I said before, the exact dates aren't confirmed, but I'm presuming whenever they are, the UCAT will, the governing body will realize that students need that 6 to 8 weeks. So roughly about this time, I would say, I would start getting on it and use all these resources that we keep on going on about, and use this time to your advantage, because there's no harm in actually taking that information up at this stage. If anything, it's just going to put you in a better position to answer the exam itself. You'll feel a lot more confident if you prepped early. And I think we're in May, June right now, so I think they're not really going to delay it that long with the registration dates. But yeah, they are yet to make an official announcement. But I personally, to give myself the best chance, would start roughly within the next few weeks, if I'm honest, or even tomorrow.
And I think what would be good is if the tutors have a little sort of give some advice on common things that people struggle with when it comes to revision. So, Chrissa, did you have some salient points to mention on that? So things that people may struggle when it comes to revision, and things that you've guided them to help.
So I think the main thing that I find is people will be really, really confident when they're sort of practicing, but then they go into the exam and then they stress out. So my main advice would be your preparation will have been enough. So when you do go into the exam, make sure you go in with a clear head, sort of make sure you're really calm when you go in, because I feel like a lot of people do get nervous when they take this exam. Another thing I would say is definitely, as Rohan mentioned, practice with the online calculator, because it's so hard to use sometimes and it takes so long to get used to. I think those are my main tips. Another tip is sort of go with your gut. And I know that sounds bad and it sounds like you're guessing, but it's more, if you think one answer is correct, don't then go back to second guess it and change your answer, because that will probably waste more time than you think. And because it is such a time restricted exam, you want to be able to give yourself the most chance of getting every question right. I think those would be my 3 top tips.
And Nathan?
Yeah, so I believe the main tip that I want to emphasize is the breaks in exercise, because making sure that you're balancing your revision and life is, I find, very important, because it is very easy to put a lot of pressure on yourself because it's only one take, that you have to keep revising, and the more you revise, the better you will do, and get into that mentality and then end up burning yourself out and not taking care of yourself. You need to make sure you have a proper balance, because efficient revision is much better than just doing loads of inefficient revision. That's my main point.
Great stuff.
Sorry, can I just add to that real quick? Just something I just thought off the top of my head. I think personally, I think is overlooked. I'd say when you are revising, however you choose to do it, just make sure you're doing it in a calm and quiet space, because I think a lot of people will tend to kind of do these tests or whatever with music in, but in the actual exam, you're not going to get that. You'll be sitting in a silent test room. Just make sure wherever you're working, just make it quiet and where you won't be disturbed while you're doing it, because the last thing you need when you've got time pressure is to be distracted by someone coming in or noises in the background.
Someone in the chat has just asked, do you wear a headset/headphones during the exam? So in test centers, there are generally 2 things that you'll be given for noise cancellation, just so you're in your own little headspace. One are earplugs, which you put in your ear, and one are headphones. The headphones aren't connected to any sort of like music device. They aren't connected to any audio device. They're just headphones to kind of block out noise. That's their sole purpose. So like Rohan was mentioning about working environment, if you think you'll be using earplugs, I recommend practicing your exams whilst they're in, just so it isn't a distraction for you when you're doing your exam.
And a question here, how do you keep yourself calm and not panic when you're in the exam, or if you're preparing, if you're on the way to the exam, for instance? So this is sort of generic stress management techniques and strategies to calm your nerves and ensure that, like Rohan said, you are maintaining a cool composure.
So I'm going to speak from my personal experience. What I did on the day of my UCAT exam, I woke up, had lots of sleep the night before, had a decent breakfast, woke up, kind of refreshed myself, make sure everything I do in the morning is all done, made sure I just effectively procrastinated for the first little while. I didn't want to do any cram revision at that point. Just kind of do what you do to make yourself calm in the morning, or just do what you do that you enjoy. Because when you go to sit the exam, you'll be in that mindset of, okay, I've had a rest, I've had a break, I've done all my revision, now time to do the exam. And then the time will fly by.
Absolutely.
Another thing that I would say to keep calm is don't actually do any questions on the day of your exam, because the amount of sort of work you do in that few hours won't massively impact your score at all. It will, if does, it will impact your score by 1 or 2 marks, but what it will do is it will stress you out. So what I would do to prepare on the day of the exam, maybe read through sort of all your tips, read through all the notes that you would have made, and sort of just reiterate the things that you want to remind yourself. So if you constantly get a certain type of question wrong, or there's something that you constantly miss out, just remind yourself not to miss that. Rather than doing questions, go over your notes and make sure you're familiar with what you need to do.
Fantastic. And in terms of just the top of my head, I was thinking, because we're coming to the very, very end of the presentation, things that students tend to slip up on, and things which can, with small incremental changes, rapidly improve the score. Have you noticed this with your history of tuition, both Nafi, Krissa, and Bilal and Rohan as well, with your experience as well? Have you noticed that if you've changed a certain way that you approach question or revision strategy, a small change results in a big difference? Can you think of things like that? It could be even common mistakes that by changing, it helps a lot.
So one of the things I've had with my tutees is you tend to get into the habit of making sure you do the question quickly and doing all of the questions quickly, and you end up with excess time at the end. And because you have so much time at the end, you start panicking about what you need to go through and what you haven't done. Make sure you spend adequate amount of time on each question. So make sure you get a pace. And once you start pacing yourself through an exam, you'll find, or I've found that my tutees found it a lot easier to kind of manage their time, and they got questions right more often.
And on that thing of time as well, another thing that I noticed was taking a minute or a second even to skim through all of the answers really helps, because it means in sort of things like decision making or in verbal reasoning where you need to cross-check things, you can pick up the answers that are easier to sort of eliminate or approve. So instead of going in order of A, B, C, D, you might think that C is the easiest to work out, and you can quickly work that one out. And if you go by that order, you'll also save a lot of time. So I think take a second to sort of read the answer as well as the question.
I'd say if I had any tips, it would be to not get caught up, because some of the questions are a lot more challenging, and I feel like they sometimes put in a harder set of questions, or just one hard question to try and throw you off and waste your time. If you find that one question is very long and convoluted, then flag it and leave it till the end, because there'll be easier questions ahead. And they may even put one at the start just to throw you off, but just make use of that flag button and move on. And just keep your eye on the clock as well, because some question sets are harder than others. So you may feel that you're more time pressured. And if that's the case, then just keep your eye on the clock so that you know that you're moving along. And it's okay to like leave one set of questions out, or to guess even in AR, for example. If you don't get the pattern, flag and move on, and don't worry too much about it.
Okay, fantastic. So we're just going to touch upon how actually you can focus on maximizing your score in the exam. So these are tips which I think Nafi is going to talk about.
Yes. So as Krissa mentioned earlier, the go with your gut feeling. It seems a bit blasé to say, but if, say, in a quantitative reasoning question, if you read the question, looked at the answers, and saw that some of the answers seem too big, some of the answers seem too small, there's a specific answer which kind of fits the magnitude of the question. Go with that, because you're probably right. And if you're not, you have used that time in another question which may be more challenging. Take advantage of the lack of negative marking. If you get something wrong, it doesn't contribute negatively towards your score. So if you're really stuck on a question, move on, because the time you save from from moving on will help you much more than that one question ever would. And my personal tip, before every section you get 1 minute, which is kind of instructions. Use that time to kind of breathe, reset, get over that previous section, regardless of how you did it, and just get yourself in the mental state to do the next set of questions.
Fantastic. That is really, really valuable information that I hope we can sort of inspire those individuals who do have a little bit of worry with regards to the UCAT. Hopefully that would have helped to clarify some misconceptions and give some more information and hopefully boost individuals' confidence. So in terms of, we have got quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to be going through the questions. Just before we do that, this is our next webinar. Next webinar is on the BMAT. The BMAT effectively, I'll get Raza to talk a little bit about this now actually. So Raza, are you there?
Yeah, I was just actually putting an answer in the chat.
Raza, I think you just muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just unmuted myself. I was just putting the answer in the chat. And personally, with this webinar that we'll cover in the BMAT, it will literally follow a similar structure where we go through some worked examples from each section, give you advice and tips, and also tell you the confirmed dates with the latest updates. I just put in the chat that I did the UCAT and BMAT, and personally, my only the thing which separated my BMAT and UCAT result was the time that I started at. So the first time I did the UCAT, for those of you who don't know, I took a gap year and did the UCAT and BMAT again. But the first time, the only reason why I got a lower score was because I didn't start early enough. So I left it to about, I think, five weeks. But for myself personally, I thought that starting earlier is much more better because you can space out how much time you can actually allocate it in between your timetables with schools and stuff. So I thought that the next time around I took it, I gave myself a longer period of time, but to avoid the burnout, I did do like little sections per day, referred back to my notes wherever I could. Any free time was just used towards a BMAT, but also the UCAT, but also relaxing. But yeah, about the BMAT, I personally have taken the BMAT as well, which is used for the Leeds Dental Institute, as well as some many medical schools as well. So in that webinar, we'll basically cover the different sections as stated. We'll have our expert panel on again with our tutors who can work through the BMAT with worked examples like we did here. And hopefully you guys can take away some useful tips and advice and any questions you do have about the BMAT, because it's one of those exams which comes after the UCAT, and it can basically be a lifesaver, like it was for me, because if I hadn't done the BMAT, I obviously wouldn't have got into Leeds. So yeah, it provides an alternative pathway, almost like a second chance redemption for you to score highly on the BMAT and possibly be considered for other medical and dental schools. So yeah, I think the BMAT it's an amazing exam, but the most important thing is not to take your eyes off the goal, which is to ace both of these exams to give you the best chance. Don't just leave it at, if I fail the UCAT, I don't get a high enough score, I'll just do the BMAT, because they both require equal amount of time and dedication for you to like get used to the structure and answer the questions correctly.
Something just came to my head there, which was actually, obviously when you're considering applying to medical school or dental school, you're going to obviously have several things that you need to complete. So obviously that is your personal statement. You have to then sit the UCAT assessment, and then whether you wish to apply for Leeds Dental Institute, the BMAT. Now, what would you say the advantage of someone, firstly, what would you say the best time to decide your dental or medical schools is, and also what advantage does the BMAT have of sitting it rather than just sitting UCAT? Because obviously people that are watching almost means that they have to revise for 2 different assessments almost at the same time. So what advantage does doing the BMAT as well have? And also with regards to timings of selecting your schools that you wish to study at, how does the date and the results of your UCAT influence that?
So I'll just touch upon the results quickly. With the UCAT, you get your results immediately. So straight after you exit your exam, you'll be given a sheet with your results on. Now, from that instant, there's 2 pathways that you could take. You could take the chance with your UCAT results, and if it barely meets the requirements, yeah, you might stand a chance. But if you have a look at your results and you're pretty certain that it's not going to meet the cutoff or entry requirements for the dental medical schools that you wish to apply for, you initially had in mind, then I think it would be best at that time to make the decision to go ahead with the BMAT. But even way before you've considered doing the BMAT and UCAT, I would suggest listing out the universities that you hope to apply for. I know we've made a standard entry table, so once our website is up and running, everybody can use that to decide what stage of your career you're at, whether you're retake or your first time applying. That will make a huge difference to the universities you want to apply for. Now, different universities use the BMAT, and they have different weightings for your personal statement or your BMAT or your UCAT exam. But personally, for me, I knew that I wanted to apply to Leeds because it would give me that chance of, if things didn't go to plan in the UCAT, I could always do the BMAT. Now, that's a decision that, of course, depends on a lot of factors when picking the universities you want to go to. But personally, for me, because I was on a gap year, I decided that I'll maximize my chances and do both the BMAT and UCAT. So that's when I initially started to revise for both of them. But of course, you can make the decision to sit the BMAT straight after you've received your UCAT results. But of course, the different dates of the BMAT depend on what sitting you're going to do it in. So there's 2 sittings, one's in September and one's in November. And the late dates for the BMAT is October, I believe, October 2nd, to be exact. But of course, that might change this year. We're not too sure on that. But I would say the moment you get your UCAT results, and not just your UCAT results, if you're just thinking about doing the BMAT and you've set your mind on, I'm not going to attempt the UCAT, or I wouldn't go down that route, because I would say consider your options holistically. If there's 2 exams these 2 exams that can actually help you get into university, I would suggest taking them both. But then again, if you believe that your UCAT score is high enough for you to it meets the entry requirements, then I would certainly say go ahead. Sorry, I just think we've got some background noise here.
Having a domestic, can you mute their mic, please? Sorry, guys, about that.
No worries. I think we've just had a question in the chat saying, what did you do in your gap year to increase your chances to get into dental medical school? Well, personally for me, I think we covered this in the first webinar, but I'll just run through some of the things that I did in my gap year. So in my gap year, I actually picked up a job as an optical assistant, which led me to meeting Cal and creating this platform essentially as well. But that was one of the things I did. I started early to increase my chances. So I knew I wanted dentistry more than ever. So the best thing for me to do was start early with my UCAT, BMAT prep. What else did I do? I got my personal statement checked multiple times because I knew it had to be solid. And also in my gap year, with part-time work, I also took up volunteering to increase my work experience, and also did shadowing at many practices. I got in touch with dentists like Cal and Dr. Mark Tangri as well, who also helped me with my application and the interview process. I prepared early for my interviews, because the good thing about gap years is you get a lot of time to reflect about what you could do. So yeah, those are just some of the things that I did in my gap year, and now I'm also contributing to the book and the website as well to create this resource. Yeah, so that's some of the things I did.
We had a question about which schools actually require the UCAT to gain a interview and an offer. So we've got a list of the schools here. So the one exception is UCLan, University of Central Lancaster, and Leeds Dental Institute, which don't require UCAT. So that's one slide, and that's the other. Now, this information will be available in our book and online for free as well. But what I would advise individuals who are considering dental or medical applications is to familiarize themselves with the prospective university that they wish to apply for. That is probably the best information source that you can gain, because that will have the most up-to-date relevant information with regards to any assessments, entry criteria, and in addition to that, I would advise individuals who are sitting the UCAT or wish to sit the UCAT to keep up to date with our Instagram, where we'll be posting information about the UCAT, but also look at the official UCAT website, which will contain information and updates. The UCAT are releasing some information tomorrow with regards to their updated plans for the assessment. So anyone who's attended this webinar should certainly check in with that. We'll obviously be notifying and sharing that news, but that's obviously coming from the officials. I'm going to just direct a question to Catherine here. So this is a question with regards to how the question itself, I'm just going to load it up, is about under preparation and regrets. So Catherine, do you want to have a...
Yeah, so I prepared a lot for the 4 sections in like the main bulk of the UCAT, but I didn't really focus that much on the SJT. Because I kind of thought, oh, it's just sort of intuition, like you just sort of know the answers if you're right to like be a dentist or whatever. But I actually got quite a bad score in it. I think I got a band 3, and most of the offers to dentistry go to like band 1 and band 2, and a lot of people really emphasize that you need to get band 1 or band 2. So I came out of that like absolutely distraught, like I was crying. I thought I wasn't going to get into dentistry. And in the end, I still got all my offers. So I would say if you don't do so well in some sections that you thought you would, it's not the end of the world, like definitely still apply, because places look at it differently. But don't put yourself in that same situation, and you definitely can prep for the SJT like Nafi and Krista had mentioned. Looking through the standards and stuff and really practicing the questions and familiarizing yourself with the sorts of things that like prop up with that.
That's really useful. We've had a question about, do I need to get 700 plus in the UCAT to sort of gain entry? I think I'm going to direct that question to Krista.
So for medical schools, I would say it really depends on the school that you're applying to. They will all have sort of different they'll have sort of different weightings on the UCAT themselves. So the ones that really weigh the UCAT highly, 700 plus is a good score. It's a very good score. But unis will definitely consider you if you don't get 700, just because depending on what like type of weighting that they put on the exam. And some unis will tell you that they want sort of a cutoff, and they'll tell you what range that most of the time they'll change that cutoff every year, but you can sort of gauge an idea from previous years what the cutoff is. So it kind of gives you something to aim for. It all depends on where you want to apply.
Yeah, so I think in regards to dental schools, for those people interested in dental school entry, effectively it works in a couple of different ways. So as I mentioned, you have various dental schools which firstly accept UCAT. That's the first thing that you really need to understand and need to get your head around. So the best place to look is the official websites of each university, which will demonstrate and illustrate exactly the criteria that they wish to have and you'll need to meet. The other thing, the next thing, is how they actually utilize that score. And that is basically whether they put emphasis on the SAT, whether they have information on whether they actually put a weighting on that particular element of the UCAT and what that weighting is in comparison with, for instance, your academic scores as well. So the slide that I'm on at the moment actually describes that. The other thing is knowing whether they consider the SJT component, which is the fifth component of the UCAT, and that has different bandings. So certain universities won't actually accept you based on those bandings, based on you being in a lower band. So for instance, a band 4 for Manchester, for instance, as it says on the slide. Now, from year to year, universities may change this criteria, and as a result of that, it's really, really important to be up to date with the university that you wish to apply for 2021 entry. This table here that you're seeing in front of you is the most up to date from the websites. The other thing is the cutoff score. I know that we've had a couple of questions regarding what score should I aim for. The scores will often be based upon the sort of how well everyone has done in the assessment. So schools schools which tend to have cutoffs will tend to basically look at the actual range of UCAT scores for that particular year of entry, and then based upon various criteria which they use and haven't disclosed, they will then basically have a cutoff. So for instance, for Glasgow in 2019, if I just go back to the previous slide, you can see that the UCAT forms an extremely important part of the UCAT, of the BDS entry requirements. And therefore, if your score is too low, then you won't be selected for interview regardless of your qualifications. So therefore, as a result of that, and it's the same thing with Newcastle, a cutoff score is used, and that will depend upon the results in the application cycle. So as a result of that, you are really competing against everyone else, which almost puts the importance on setting yourself apart from everyone and doing as best as you can, really. So those that had the question regarding what score is ideal, although I know it hasn't answered your question directly, hopefully you can understand that you shouldn't necessarily aim for a particular score. You should just aim to do as well as you can, because every year the results and the averages actually differ. And based on statistics, you can see that the cutoff scores vary between universities, but also the real importance is on just doing as well as you can in the UCAT to give you the best possible stance, because many universities do put a weighting on that, and even certain universities won't even accept you if you have got a lower score, which they will determine. Unfortunately, we don't know that, but they will determine that. I hope that helps to answer some of your questions. Okay, just going on to the next question. Okay, so in terms of those, so this is, I think it's more of a dental/medical work experience question. So what would you do if you haven't been able to get work experience yet and were supposed to do your work experience placement this summer? I think this is a very, very valid question, and it's a question that we get quite a lot. So I think Catherine would be great to answer this.
Yeah, so I just quickly replied to that in the chat. So leading on from that, you've got to think about what the point of work experience is. So the point of work experience is to familiarise yourself with dentistry so that you know confidently that it's a career that you want to go into. You can still do that by talking to dentists, dental students, finding out as much about the career as you possibly can to get that knowledge and know that it's suited to you. The other purpose of work experience is to get that experience of the sort of skills and stuff that are involved as a dentist and sort of practice them a bit for yourself. So I'd say you have to do in a healthcare setting or in a dental practice. You can do that by going out and volunteering, and this will be really good for showing the admissions tutors that you have that experience firsthand of the interpersonal skills that you've learned and stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And just to echo your points there, I think the key thing with gaining, whether it's dental or medical work experience, or if you have both, that's even better for any type of entry to help you solidify your career pathway. The key thing is reflecting upon what you've learned and how that reflection, how that experience has further strengthened your decision to pursue that particular career. If I just get Bilal to say a few words, and maybe Rohan, because both of them are dental students as well. I think they'll be able to shine a bit more light on that.
So is this on work experience?
Yeah, on work experience.
Yeah, so another thing that you can do that I actually did, even though I had work experience, was I read up on a lot of online cases. And that's useful to do because through reading interesting cases and stuff, you can get an insight into what skills a dentist requires. So often one skill that's talked about a lot is communication. And communication is a complex skill. It can come in verbal forms, it can come in non-verbal forms, it can come in written forms. And how that's applied to dentistry is actually really interesting. So, you could be communicating with children in one consultation and then an elderly patient in the next. And how you talk to people from different backgrounds is really important. And through reading cases, you can also get an insight into how dentistry changes based on different people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. So that would be my tip.
Yeah, I would say if you can't get work experience, then something that I did alongside the work experience that I managed to somehow get hold of was a massive open online course, which was, I think it was run by the University of Newcastle at the time. I'm not sure if it still exists, but it was on a different website, like a third-party website that would basically showcase this course. And what that was about was basically just dentistry itself. It gave you an insight into a day in the life of a dentist, basically, and it would talk about the simple things like some of the instruments that would be used, how some processes occur, so like how dentures are made and things like that. And it just gives you a better insight, because at the end of the day, things like dentistry and medicine are 5-year courses, sometimes 6 years. The universities want you to be sure that you know what you're getting yourself into and that you're committed to the profession. So I think just showing any kind of interest for reading articles or even things I did like that course, it would just be very, very useful for the application.
About that course, I think there's a similar one that the University of Sheffield posted.
It might have been Sheffield then, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's called Discover Dentistry.
That's right, yeah, I think it was that one, yeah, sorry, yeah. I think that was a very useful course. That was just something I did alongside the work experience just to get a better insight into what dentistry is like.
Yes, it is the University of Sheffield, and they run I believe it's a 4 to 6 week course, which is for free and it's via FutureLearn, which is a third-party course organisation. So for anyone considering dentistry, I would strongly urge it. And obviously, as Catherine mentioned, we also have a free dentistry experience course, which covers so much information that you'd likely expect in a dental work experience placement, from the different types of tools that you use to NHS versus private dentistry, and lots of information. There's over 20 different tutorials. In terms of oh yeah, someone's actually mentioned the University of Pennsylvania as well, which is great for dental medicine. In terms of the sort of information regarding work experience, it is a very difficult time, and I think for both medics and dentists wishing to apply, what I would suggest is just being patient. I think that obviously the priority at the moment is ensuring that we protect patients, and that the dental clinics are open and run for the purpose of treating patients. And I think it would be quite difficult to go and gain and attain work experience during this time. That doesn't mean that you can't gain information and experiences related to learning about the career and learning insight into the career online. There's lots of information online, speaking to dentists and reaching out to them. There's also lots of YouTube videos of different dental procedures as well, which is really useful to sort of get an understanding of the types of treatments that a general dental practitioner and even a specialist can perform. I'd recommend the GMC and the GDC websites for those individuals interested in learning a little bit about the different careers that you can go down. Other really useful resources are the journals. So journals such as the British Dental Journal, you can find that via the British Dental Association, and the same for medicine, and that's the BMJ. And in addition to that, there are so many other related websites that you'll be able to just do a Google search and find out. And we also had a question regarding what to do if you're rejected from medical or dental school, which obviously is a really it's not a nice experience, and it can be quite disheartening, especially because you've put the effort in, and the sheer fact that you've sat here through this webinar, and you're obviously going to sit through other webinars and undertake so much investment and time. It is very disheartening, but I think Raza's going to touch a little bit on that because he's actually been through that situation.
Yep, thanks. I'm getting a lot of private questions being asked about my personal journey, so I won't go a bit too much into that. But yeah, touching upon rejection. So I was actually rejected from dental school the first time I applied. And what I did from there on, I think, has led me to this position. So I sat down, and honestly, this is what I did. I got out a piece of paper one day and I just said what parts of my application were in my control. So that's my personal statement, my results, my interviews. So those are the things that you can physically control, how well you do at them. So I sat down and identified some weaknesses within my personal application. And I said, I created a little plan of what to do next. So I decided I'd take a gap year and not give up on my career. And then I just prepped early, put in hard work. And if you are rejected, it's not the end of the world. Me and Cal, we've all, experienced some sort of rejection once in our life. So it's okay to be in that position, but what you do from there on will determine where you go in life. So my point, what I'm trying to say here is, if you are rejected, consider your next steps, whether it's you want to retake your A-levels, or you want to, maybe look at an alternative pathway into dentistry. For example, you could do postgrad and enter that way, because there are a lot of people who do it, who don't get in round the first time round. Take that opportunity as a learning curve. Don't give up. And just try your best. And if you're really interested in doing dentistry, then explore more about the career. Do as much as you can to give yourself the best possible chance. That means scoring highly on BMAT and UCAT, giving everything. It might be that you get no interviews like I did the first time round, But what I didn't do is give up on my A levels. So I still worked harder than ever, just to get through the A levels and give myself the best possible chance applying as a gap year student. So yeah, those are some of the things that you can do. I'm also getting a lot of questions about how we actually came up with this idea about I want to be a dentist website and everything. So Cal, do you want to address that as well? And I'm going to answer some private questions.
Yeah, it was quite a unconventional thing, but just to cut a long story short, really, I always wanted to. I've been doing dental educational things for quite a while. I'm a qualified dentist, and basically, Raza, I met him in the opticians because I was going for an eye test. He noticed that my title was Dr. Kalpesh Prishpat. He was like, "Are you dental? Are you medical?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm a dentist." And then anyway, he was like, "Oh, can I come for work experience?" So I ended up helping Raza with some interview advice, tips, etc. And then Raza obviously attained a place, so he holds an offer. And then we just, lockdown happened, and we thought, it'd be really, really useful and valuable if we could share some advice that lots of students have with their experience, because we haven't had the easiest experience of getting in, and we know that it's not an easy experience, but we wanted to provide a platform which would help address lots of various questions that typical students have, and that's pretty much how we came up with the idea. It was very unconventional, and we just tried to utilize lockdown to hopefully help share advice with people that are going through this, because we've been through it ourselves, and we know that if there was something like this available, we would definitely grasp onto it, because we do find that by working with current students who are really successful and they're really ambitious, like Catherine, Rohan, Bilal, and so many others, which I mentioned on my first webinar. We have such a really good team. We're really lucky to be working with everyone, and they're going to be, there have been, and they will be sharing so much more advice and free tips as well. And there's lots of things on our website. I know that we've had lots of questions about our website. We are constantly working on that, and we don't want to launch it yet because there's just a few tweaks that we need to make. For instance, the work experience course, we're just finalizing that, but we will share the website when it launches via our socials, and also sending it out to anyone who's applied for this or signed into this via their email as well. So don't worry, you will be the first to hear. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm just going to go onto the chat and look at the questions. So there is information. Is it harder to apply for a postgraduate? So we've actually got a couple of postgraduates on our team. Unfortunately, they couldn't attend tonight. However, I'm going to be sharing the first webinar on Instagram, probably Monday. So that's going to contain lots of information regarding postgraduate applicants. So you'll be able to gain more information upon entering dentistry as a graduate, and also hearing from a graduate. So we've recorded that webinar and we'll be sharing that. And one of those graduates is a dental hygiene and therapy student as well. So I know that we have got some members of the audience tonight that are DH&T. In terms of if you do a grad dent degree where you start receiving student loan, we've got information on the student loans and financing from NHS bursary in our book. Our book is available to sign up, and I will be sharing a link with everyone just in a moment for the sign up for that, which does contain information regarding that. For undergraduate courses, postgraduating, all you get is maintenance loan. Okay, someone's tried to answer that question. Okay, can you talk about MaxFax and how, if you have a dentistry degree, you can do a shortened medicine degree? That's a really interesting question. So for those individuals who may be considering going down that route, there are various courses. The one that springs to mind is the 3-year fast track course available at King's College London, which is a course for medical students wishing to do dentistry. In terms of medicine degrees, again, we've got lots more information about that in our book. We would direct you to that just to get some more information. And we'll also be posting some stuff on our website regarding that as well. Right. I understand that we're getting a lot of questions regarding the e-lessons and what we'll be covering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go back to the slide that was detailing the e-lessons, which was just before the worked examples. So in terms of the e-lessons, okay, they are 2-hour lessons, firstly, and in the e-lessons, every single e-lesson is dedicated to a particular topic of the UCAT. So, for instance, tomorrow's will be the verbal reasoning of the timetables there. So decision-making thereafter, and every single section covered throughout the month. In terms of what we'll be covering, what we'll be doing is we will, in fact, I'll just get Nafi. Nafi, you're going to be hosting that session. So do you want to just...
Yes, I'm hosting tomorrow's session. So within the sessions, I'm going to be doing a brief kind of overview of the UCAT, just as a recap for anyone who may or may not be aware. And I'll be going through different skills that you may need, different tips, different tricks, and work examples throughout. Things you need to be aware of, things you can do to prep for certain sections, tactics. And finally, towards the end, I will be answering, I'll have some dedicated time towards answering any questions that you may have about that section or any section.
Yeah, that's great. Just touching on that, yeah. So the aim of these lessons is to effectively really go through each section in depth, and that's why we've dedicated 2 hours to that. The idea is to really get you to understand exactly what the test is sort of assessing you on, and going through the sections with each of the different types of questions, as we've briefly mentioned today. We'll be going and expanding upon those. So I know that due to time, we've sort of gone through those worked examples quickly, but we will be covering lots more worked examples from the different types of styles of questions per section. So it's really a fantastic way to pick up on the different types of questions and the styles, and to really help you master each type of question, so that even if you are faced with a difficult example, or a difficult question in the assessment, you will utilize the strategies and methods that our tutors teach you, so that you can apply it to difficult questions, meaning that you'll increase your speed, your confidence will be increased, and ultimately your score will also be increased because you would have had that additional support. In addition to that, you'll be undertaking some mini tests as well. So we'll get you to cover some questions on the lesson, and we'll be going through those questions with answers, so that everyone that attends feels that they are truly valued. And also, if you do have any questions, we will certainly cover them in that lesson. I hope that helps to answer the question related to what we'll be covering. We've had a question regarding the order of the real exam. So, Chrissa, in terms of the order of the exam, could you just touch upon the order in terms of like the different sections, and which section will be done first? Will it be the SJT, or is that done last?
So the SJT is actually done last. I might be wrong, but I think the order goes, so you get the verbal reasoning section first, and then it's decision making after that. After that, you get quantitative reasoning, I think, and then abstract, and then SJT will come right at the end.
Yeah, I think Bilal's just, have you got something to say, Bilal, on that?
Yeah, so that's perfect. Yeah, that's what I remember it being.
Yeah, so what we've done is we've structured our lessons according to the order effectively in the exam. So this is from the UCAT website. You can see yeah, we've structured each lesson so that the first section that you'll likely cover in the assessment will be the verbal reasoning. So therefore, our first lesson is on the verbal reasoning, so that it gets you thinking about that section and giving you the confidence to go and tackle those tougher questions as well. So that's great. So I think in terms of questions, if anyone does have any further questions, please do let us know in the chat box. I think we've pretty much reached the end of our end of our webinar today. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to just go to the screen. So for anyone who is interested in learning a little bit more about our e-lessons, then you can scan that code. Also, the link I have put in the chat box as well for you to access. But if you do have any questions, please place them in the chat box. We're here. We'll be here for a few minutes more just to ensure that we've covered everyone's questions and ensure that everyone has got their questions answered.
I've just got a question. I'm just going to direct it on to Nafi because I think he would be the expert in answering this. So the question is, what advice or tips would you give to somebody revising for both the BMAT and the UCAT exam?
I remember doing that. So what I did when I did that particularly was I would set, or at the end, so on a Sunday, I would sit down for about 20 minutes and plan what sections of what exam I would do in each day of that following week. So, for example, on a Monday, I would do abstract reasoning in the UCAT, and then following day, I would do section 1 of the BMAT. However you feel like you want to do your revision. So I'd say space them out, do each separately on each day. I try not to do them on the same day because I don't want to have a different way. I don't want to have my brain thinking in a different way for 2 different exams on the same day. I don't personally like that, but it may differ for you. So I'd pick one section of each exam for one day, spend a few hours on that, and then change every day.
Just to add to that, the UCAT, you kind of always sit at the end of summer, so you have a lot of time in summer to revise for that. But when you're preparing for your BMAT, that will actually be in term time. So another tip there is make sure you're sort of up to date with all of your A-level work as well, so that when it does come up to sort of the week before or the few weeks before the BMAT, you can almost afford to not ignore, but sort of push aside your A-level work at that point just for that week, so that you can focus on the BMAT, and then you won't sort of fall behind as much if you've kept on top of it or even gotten ahead beforehand.
I completely agree. So in my year 12 summer, what I actually did was I dedicated the first few weeks of it to just going over my A-level subjects throughout that year, just so I was completely confident and I'd gone through everything I needed to. So when the time came that I needed to focus on something else, I wasn't worried or stressed at all that I needed to catch up on things or keep up with things. I knew that I was keeping up with it already and I'd done all the work I need to.
Great. Any further questions on that, Raza?
No, I think we've covered the ones from my end.